Good evening, everyone, and welcome to UdK Tuesday number 247, this time with DRIES RODET, on behalf of his office, Truwant Rodet, upon invitation by Professor Bru and Evelyn Jürgens, who will begin with the introduction. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for inviting. Thank you for coming. After the lecture, there will be time and space for questions. We will, as always, start with questions from our first year. And then if anyone in here has a question, just raise your hand and we will give you the microphone. And if anyone online has a question, just put them in the YouTube live chat or on our Telegram channel. So thank you and have fun.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining today's lecture. So it's a real pleasure to have DRIES RODET here tonight, together with Charlotte Truwant. He's the founding partner of the Franco-Belgian office Truwant Rodet, which is based in Basel. Since 2013, the office has opened its fields of investigation to architecture, urban planning, landscape architecture, installation, furniture design, and research. I think I could go on. DRIES has graduated at the St. Lucas Architecture School in Ghent in 2005. And since then, he collaborated with offices such as Pascal Flammer and Bas Metz. Both Charlotte and DRIES are involved in teaching. Charlotte as a scientific assistant at the chair of Alexandre Thériault, DRIES as a guest professor at the School of Architecture in Versailles. In 2017, they won the Swiss Art Award. And furthermore, they received a prize for the elevation of the building of the University of Art and Design in Geneva. And they are currently in charge of the renovation and extension of the Swiss Cultural Center in Paris. So it's now with pleasure that I hand over to our guest, as we are really keen to hear more about your position and approach.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for this introduction. And maybe just one thing, I will come back to it later because I just presented very shortly the Centre Culturel Suisse. It's together with the French office ASBR that we're doing this project. We're not doing this alone, so to share the credits. So, yeah, there we go. Sorry. Like I already said, I'm DRIES RODET. This is Charlotte Truwant, my partner with who I have the office. Since a couple of years, 2013 could be set as the year that we start. It's all a bit unclear, let's say, because when does an office really start? When you start discussing about architecture. But we're not the only ones. We have, of course, a group of people working together with us before and for the moment, and it's important to talk also about them because they're part of the office. It's not just the two of us. And we can extend this to a long list of people with who we like to work together. That's why we have the pluses in the name. It's not just us who do projects, but we like to collaborate with people with specific expertise or knowledge or interests. And we like to share that. I hope that will become clear through the lecture. We have a space in Basel, in a garage, that we also, again, share with a lot of different people, graphists, type designers, architects. And yeah, we believe strongly that the space in which you work also influences your work. So it's important to acknowledge that. Next to that, we have an association called Verein. This is not a mistake. It's an association in which we invite young offices to give lectures in Basel, and we have our next one coming up. If anybody of you is in Basel the coming weeks, you're more than welcome to join. I called the lecture today on certain conditions. It's something that we've been working on quite a long time in the office. It's one of the topics that we like to work with. And I try to I take out of the, today I kind of selected projects linked to this topic. Of course, this is only one of the many topics that run through the office. But we're quite fascinated in the times we live today. Kind of, can architecture be something else than just an object? Can we start redefining a bit what architecture means today? For this, I like to start with a project that's maybe quite exemplary for this idea of uncertain conditions and this idea of uncertainty that somehow you cannot always control everything. I think as architects, we like to have a full control over everything, but what happens when you let go for a certain amount this control, and can you set somehow conditions to create a possibility or a potential for certain things to happen? This was a Kunstanbau in Lausanne that we did together with artist Fabian Marti and with water engineers ICO. It's for a bigger project that's from Jan Kinsberger. He won the competition for a campus. So these are all buildings within the middle of a big park. And we proposed within that big park for the competition to do an intervention. When we looked at the site quite fast, it was clear for us that there's like there was already a lot on the site, although it looks very empty. But apparently there was a big problem with water maintenance and rainwater and what to do with the water in the park, which would only become more difficult once it's constructed and there would be more hard surface on site. And at the same time, there was a very strong height difference through the whole site. Like you see here, the pink is the lower part, the green is the upper part, and there's a very strong separation between the two. So we started to think, can we somehow make a fountain within that park, a place where somehow people can come together at the same time that can create another type of nature on that site. Together with Fabian, he came with this reference of Cranach, of the Fountain of Youth, with this idea of somehow on a mythical way how water always brought also life, at the same time death, at the same time it's dangerous, it brings life, it's necessary, it can be too much, and how this can at the same time become a center around which people can come together. Here you see the full plan of the campus. So you have the 3 buildings of Jan Kinsberger, and on the top housing that will be built. When we started to look into the project deeper, we started to get fascinated also with fountains of Renaissance and other older fountains that look quite aesthetic and classical at the same time, that are kind of integral water systems that recuperate water on the top of the mountain. Here you see Villa Barbara from Palladio with the big reservoir on top, and then through just gravity the whole thing sinks down and brings water to the fields down, going through the grottos, etc. So we were thinking, can we do the same today still? Can we kind of link the buildings and the rainwater that's collected on top of the buildings for our fountain? And can we create a fountain that is just powered by rainwater? And at the same time, how can we create with this water, through the setting of different conditions, different qualities of nature? For example, in the beginning, you have our reservoir will come there, water will go really slowly on a very rough concrete surface, so it will start forming mosses, and then it will go faster, like a little channel in a very smooth surface, and nothing will happen. Nothing will grow, and then there will be much more a river situation. And like this, we can actually, just by deciding the speed of the water and the texture of the concrete or the material in which it will move, we can create a fountain through which water will infiltrate again in the soil over a longer period, and at the same time create a new nature on site. So it's like it's not so clear here on the screen, but it's a 120-meter long fountain over which then this whole system will develop from a really big reservoir on top. There will be a massive reservoir to start with, and then there will be 2 underwater reservoirs to make the whole fountain also charged with water even on hot days. And I think especially in days like today, you start to realize the importance that water will also play over the next century. So the last image rendering of what it could be. But of course, we don't know what it's gonna be. That will only, time will only show that. We won that now. This competition has to be developed, buildings have to be built, and our project will be ready in a couple of years. To bring that down further to a second project, this kind of uncertainty of how to work with and how to kind of plan for future, and at the same time try to read what's already on site. We were selected for the Basel Pavilion competition in Basel for the Architecture Week, where there was a site in Dreispitz, which is a very industrial area that's going to be developed soon. On the rail tracks, there was asked to work with a catalog of reused materials to build a pavilion out of reused materials. This is the situation of Dreispitz. It's like a plateau between Bruderholz, which is a hilly green situation, and the park on the right side. It's a very dry plateau, almost fully covered with asphalt and stone. And we got this catalog to work with, like of all materials, very well prepared by Circular. Every material was measured, how big it was, a 3D model with it. And then we had to come with something. So we started to work with this site, basically seeing what is already on site. So you have this, I don't know if you saw it before, it's a beautiful garage building, VMM engineers on the top. A little house here on the bottom still that's standing there from the signal house. And then we started to look at the site in itself, what is still there. These trusses from the rail tracks on which the cables were hung. We also have cables. So we actually expanded our catalog with even the site itself and everything we found on it. And we created a beam that's somehow way too big for its use. At the same time, it can actually cover this, or can deal with the scale of this ginormous site. And against it, we post just like the vaults of the parking garage in the same way, with folded metal plates, kind of almost like a flown away roof against the beam, creating a place of shade on the site. So we started with actually making something that is not really related to any program, but that can absorb quite a lot in itself. So you have here the roof, you have the beam, you have a platform that can roll, a wall on the bottom, and some steps. So it became this whole collection of almost on-site that became more like an urbanism, let's say, on-site than kind of the object of the pavilion in itself. To develop it then was quite interesting. We did this together with Neven Kostic, the engineer, because we started to work with these metal beams and putting them together, and it's quite fast. We realized that you're not making a normal beam. That's not how a normal beam is made, because the joints, we cannot make them in the same way, because we just have to, it's found material. They have a certain way they are. So our big beam didn't work at all. Until Neven actually started saying, but it works if you just put it on tension. So the whole beam actually got flipped up in its functioning around, and it actually was pulled on both sides, which suddenly made that it was not working on pressure like normally, but the other way around. Which we found very fascinating, that just by working with found materials, suddenly your whole logic changes, and we could never have drawn this beam in this way if we would have worked in a more with more standard materials. Here you start to see a bit like how these beams come together with small plates to hold them together, and these joints, they need to be put under tension rather than on pressure. But what maybe was more important even on site is we started to map everything that is already there of plants. And if you start looking very closely, you start to see there's actually a lot growing in a few years. That we started to think, okay, can we just acknowledge this? And can we then create conditions for it to that this happens even more often. So the whole idea was to use something that was not from the catalog, but we had the possibility to add some pieces to it, but to use an old grain silo as a big reservoir of water that would recuperate the water from the parking garage that would leak on site and would suddenly create a nature, a fast-growing nature. So you would have the pink dots, which are cosmos flowers, this kind of high pink flowers that grow really fast, combined with then a series of found plants that were already there that we would reinforce, and other ones that we would actually mix with it, creating actually a park with the existing of today for a project for that could hopefully also stay, because normally the pavilion was only seen for 6 months, and it was our hope that this park would be somehow the start of the new development after, and somehow we were very, let's call it a coincidence, also now Grafton won the competition for the whole master plan, and they decided to keep everything on site and turn it into a park. So somehow there was a logic in it that got also acknowledged by Grafton. They saw the value of the site, let's say. So you would have actually a whole set of different possibilities on site under this these big structures, to at the end, over these 6 months, a park that would have grown to the last days. A lighthouse competition, maybe less uncertain, but definitely conditions, because it has to stay, it has to hang. It's in Geneva for a yacht club. I don't know if anybody knows Lac Le Mans a bit, but what is quite fascinating is you have the big fountain of the jet d'eau of the Lac Le Mans, which was actually before it was for an hydraulic plant to let the pressure go off the hydraulic plant. They opened the valve and then it would shoot up, which became the symbol of Geneva, but which was never intended. A little lighthouse out of metal, very fragile but very strong, that stands there also on the other side, and the baths, les bains des paquis of the Lake of Geneva. And then I don't know how much people are familiar here with sailing on the Lake of Geneva, but it's quite an important sailing courses that are happening there, and there's a lot of different winds that function on the Lake of Geneva. And you have Geneva really at the tip here, and the orange one is the one we were designing, which becomes one of the furthest points you can somehow get onto the water. It was all in the context of the Le Bol d'Or, which is one of the big sailing competitions in Geneva. They wanted to have a new start cabin where you could sit in, see the starting line, and they could kind of judge the whole competition, which is just a few days a year. It's very little, but they wanted to build the whole construction for that, together with the lighthouse. It's linked, the harbor's linked to Alinghi, which is one of the big sailing companies, or sailing teams, which work with extremely high-tech material. Like you see, the boats don't even touch water anymore today, they just fly over it. And they even, for one of their races, they flew it over the Alps. It's quite a magnificent sight. And kind of this whole high-tech world started to interest us. How normally when we think about a lighthouse, we think about something very solid. But when you start to look at the whole sailing world, even the jet d'eau, it's all very light, high-tech engineered material to the extreme, to actually deal with these forces of wind, of these conditions of the lake. So we started with a little very compact one-floor cylinder building, which could contain everything for the race. So you would have the table to watch the water. At the same time, you have toilet beds, everything they need for these few days a year. But we found it interesting to actually suspend it, to not take that spot under it, and to actually leave this space where you could get so far to the water, to leave it completely free, and make just put the box on the right height it needed to be to have the right viewing angle, and suspend the whole box from the pier. our engineers, of course, they calculated everything. So there was not the smallest deformation, because this is quite tricky. This thing flies away, like it's really like a sailing boat, almost, that you have to start thinking. Even the cupboards inside were structural, because everything needed to be structural to make it one solid box. And at the end, you get this little object that almost defies gravity, but that is actually quite solid, hanging above this empty spot where you could get really far into the lake and look back to Geneva. With then on top, you have the light, like you see it here, and the flags and everything that comes with sailing. We worked together with Raphael Hefti on the competition, and he designed for the whole piece, for the tower, an extra lamp. So you have the lamp on the bottom, and he proposed a prism with a certain rotation system that the light would fall on, the light that falls onto the lighthouse would break and create a prism effect onto the rest of the Geneva. So even at daytime, you would see at certain spots the lighthouse as a color appear, a color that constantly changed, that you can somehow not grasp. Just like the jet d'eau is there as this kind of ephemeral monument, having kind of another point on the lake, in this manner. I just quickly check time also to see where I am. Okay, great. I'll go even faster. This is a competition we did for the head that was mentioned before. Unfortunately, we lost, but we. The head is an architecture and design school in Geneva, and they bought this old factory that they renovated. And the moment they moved in, they realized it was just not big enough. They needed more space. So the question was to put an extra level on top of this monument protected building. The building itself, because it was a factory, it had a very rational structure. So you just have column within the middle, a corridor, with then on two sides the classrooms. And for the extension, we were thinking, okay, how can we actually, instead of repeating another time the same floor like they have already four under it, how can we propose something that's very different, that's the opposite? So suddenly the corridor is completely on the outside. It starts to work almost like a threshold to the outside, and all the ateliers are joined in the middle. And how can we make this space into an extremely flexible space? It can be a big space, it can be a small space, it can be something that is whatever they need. If they want to do a fashion show there, they do a fashion show. If they want to do small classrooms, they do small classrooms. So so we decided to make a roof. Like today, when you're standing on the roof, it's very nice. You're in this kind of horizontal landscape, very beautiful. So that everything we actually add is in a roof above your head. Of techniques, of structure, of even walls that can come down, doors that slide. Everything is linked to this this roof situation. The structure here you see, so there's the facade here and the columns on the inside. And together with Schnetzer Puskas was our engineer on this, as the same as the lighthouse. The structure actually comes in the middle and lies on little beams, and in this way, actually. The weight is evenly distributed on this system, because it was quite tricky to add on this existing building another layer, like you see here. So at the end, it became this kind of very horizontal slab of classrooms that can just be used through through curtains to garage doors to different systems. It can be separated in different spaces. Like you see here, the doors that can just lift and make it into one big space. And so everything became really about somehow the space here between the classroom itself and the outside space that can be closed off. They become a corridor, a threshold to the outside, and can even control easily the climate of this box on the roof, this glass box that still stays protected from the sun. This is quite directly continued in a project we did for Schnetzer Puskas, for the engineers, an extension of their office spaces on the ground floor in a building in Basel that was built in '65, and that was actually renovated in 2013. And it used to, the space where I'm talking about on the ground floor, it used to be a John Valentine fitness club. Quite a magnificent space where the columns became Roman columns, and there were frescoes painted on the wall. It was quite, it was really 60s kind of idea of fitness. It was swimming pool inside. It was quite a known place in Basel. But what was left of it today, because the stairs was closed, the underground was rented out, is just this space here, which is the space they took. A very bizarre space, kind of carved out of the building, almost like a leftover space. But we accepted it as it is and said, okay, let's just work with space like it is today. And let's see how can we do actually not too much to it, but just only the barely necessary. The floor is not really pretty. Nothing is really pretty in the space. It's quite a difficult space. But it has a huge potential. There's still more than half a meter of fake ceiling. We had to anyway rip out the ventilation system because the ventilation was not functioning. So we had to adapt. Normally we should have taken everything out and thrown everything away and replaced it fully new. We convinced the clients quite easily to keep the existing ventilation and just put it up to date. So it's not functioning 100% like office space is put to the norm today, but it's more than enough. Office spaces are just over ventilated today. And they said, okay, we do what we think is necessary so we can actually keep everything that's in there and we don't have to rip it all out. So it became really, again, a question of sealing this whole project. It was about techniques and sealing, replacing ventilation, adding sprinklers to it. There was a problem with fire security, closing off the beams that got exposed. It was about electro cables because there were like cables everywhere falling out of the ceiling. So it was just about dealing what we had and just organizing this in this ceiling to this kind of complex whole. The only thing we actually did was we painted the whole structure that was now visible in green. So suddenly you started to read actually a certain structure in space. It was almost, you feel now much more that you're in a bigger structure in which walls are placed and somehow this space is carved out. Even this column in the backspace, which is standing in the middle of a room for no reason, makes today more sense. We added to all of this a new layer of lights, kind of almost like a new ceiling under all the techniques, which can be all put on or off in different fields, giving again flexibility. And we designed ourselves a light together with Lichterloh in Basel, which is also again the most simple light you can make out of an aluminium profile with a LED tube in there. But this gave us the possibility to make a very continuous ceiling over the whole place and create this new horizon. So, and then we also decided that everything that's above this horizon, we don't paint it, we leave it as it is. Like here you still see the blue of the frescoes of before, of John Valentine's club. And they somehow become part of this ceiling. The only thing we also added, which was very important for the space itself, is a curtain. Together with Chevalier Masson, we did this. It's one big curtain rail that actually gives us the possibility to organize the spaces in a lot of different ways through two different types of curtains. One that is shiny on top, the other one is shiny on the bottom. Because again, it's quite a deep space, quite a dark space. So, but even the shiny side to reflect or the lights or the outside light inside the space. And at the same time they can black off the space completely also because they're dark blue on the other side. You see the old frescoes coming through. So basically this image became this ceiling, this almost technical organization of functions became for us the project in itself. And everything else that came to it, like there used to be the staircase down to the floor downstairs. We just filled it up, like just, okay, we don't care. It's not the topic. We put all the attention to the ceiling. So actually this underlayer loses importance also and can be dealt with in a very direct way. The only thing we added to the whole thing is furniture. We reused the kitchen from a friend's project that we just repurposed inside the space, which was a little bit more complex than we anticipated. And we made tables that again deal with flexibility within that space. So it's a table, 5 meter by 1 meter 40 table that can be easily put up to a high table or a low table, creating actually the possibility to have a standing situation, sitting situation, presentation situation, all in as light as possible, so you can easily move it around, because you can make very flexible spaces, but if you cannot move anything around, nothing is flexible. And a small round table to it, again, in a very easy way to demount and mount. So at the end, it's this quite graphical plan that becomes a whole series of that can represents a whole series of spaces that can be organized just with the curtains, where you can hide the kitchen, where you can show the kitchen, where you can project, you can make it dark, you can make it white. So the space is not anymore kind of a clear space, but it becomes much more an environment in itself, where you can control those, let's say again, conditions around them. Centre culturel Suisse, I'm going to pass quite fast over it because it's, we're in the stage of developing. But it's a building in the Marais in Paris. It's one of the very dense areas of Paris, and the whole centre is actually almost inside a building block. You have three types of spaces. You have a shop here in front, old hotel, like they call it in France, and an old atelier that were already renovated. So this is the hotel from 1603. The atelier is in the back. This is a picture from 83, but it's much older. They got renovated in 85 to a kind of a very postmodern idea of architecture, everything very symmetrical, although the building in itself is not at all symmetrical. It's quite forced on top of it. It opened the center in 85, and then at that time there was the entry of the and still today you have the entry actually from a small street on the side to get into the centre. It's really hidden. This is the street entry, and then you have the door there. In 87 they added to it a shop lying next to it, but that's only connected inside for the people working there. So these are the two phases today of the centre. Here you see a full plan of the 3 different buildings, and kind of the very complex world it is. So it's a shop, it's offices, it's 2 exhibition spaces, and it's a small theater space, like you see in the back, all in this very dense Parisian situation. We decided quite fast together. This is a project that we do together with ASBR from Paris, and who are actually living very close to the center and also know the center really well. And we decided quite fast, let's not actually do too much to it, because the volume itself, we could not change anything. You cannot go up, you cannot go down, not left, right, everything's protected. And the main questions that were posed to us is about acoustics, about ventilation, about handicap accessibility. It's all about norms that it needs to reach, which it doesn't today. But when we looked at the center and its history itself, we saw how artists, over the now 40 years, how they used the center how they wanted. They used the courtyard for exhibitions. They used the salle de spectacle, the theater room for exhibitions, but also for performances. The same for the exhibition room. Somehow there was not a clear, for artists, as soon as there was just space, there's not kind of a clear function to anything. So in our own proposals, what we did was to just work on the thresholds, to not drastically change the full organization, but somehow only the borders in between. So one of the big moves we do is to change the entry to the bookshop. So you enter now from here, and it becomes like a entry situation where they also sell books. where you come then into a small exhibition space. Oh, sorry, it was too fast. Then you have the courtyard, and then you have a foyer, and then you have the theater space in the back. And on the first floor, you have the exhibition space. And we just make now that all the walls in between can be taken away or can be put down. So that makes that suddenly the foyer and the theater space together can become one space, can become an exhibition space. The seats can be moved, can be changed how we want. And the same to the courtyard. So this can become almost an outside space from the courtyard on. And in this way, to kind of, instead of adding square meters, which we could not do to the whole project, we just decided to make it almost like a hyper-technical machine where you can just say, today, this is theater space. Today, that is, they can have theater upstairs, they can have exhibition downstairs. It suddenly all functions and becomes much more flexible in its usage and without having to add anything to it. So here you have again this sequence that doesn't change drastically, but it's about all these layers in between, with the possibility of changing everything. And we're now 9th of September is going to be this first stone laying, and we managed to realize it like that. So we're very happy about that. But this is what I showed now is the competition entry. So it already evolved quite a lot since then. Coming close to the end already. The Kunstmuseum in Olten, to stay in this kind of idea of changing spaces and also maybe of doing less, which suddenly also becoming here a topic, I feel, was a competition we were invited to do together with Wetenschap in Olten in Switzerland for a small museum that is today here and for a part here, and to move it into the building next door, take down the other building, and extend the museum in the back. And then build apartments here and sell the apartments. A lot of things for a small town where there's not much budget to do a museum, and there's maybe not even a housing market that needs extra spaces. They didn't know what to do with the spaces. So when we were looking at the building, we quite fast realized also that the qualities of today will be very difficult to keep in the future. When we built in the back of the old schoolhouse, this one, a protected building, half of a museum, we can never open the facade. We're not allowed to do that, which today is one of their main qualities. In a small town, Olten, which is not, it's not always easy to get everybody inside. They have a full open vitrine to the street side, and everybody can actually now see and look in and walk in. And they would lose that in the future because they had to move to the building next door. On top of that, in the back of the other building of the old schoolhouse, there are some beautiful trees that are more than 100 years old. And today the climate is still that you can chop them down, but already in Basel, it's not anymore possible. So we actually said, okay, let's just keep them because they're as much as valuable as the building in itself. So maybe we should not build in the back. So we started to actually look at the buildings themselves, the existing one, and discovered in the basement of this one, the one that was going to be taken down and turned into apartments, that it used to be two buildings. This is one basement and this is a second basement that over time got renovated into one building. With a very similar size to the old schoolhouse, but less value in the eyes of the historical department. So what we proposed was, okay, we're gonna re-question the program. Maybe we can actually make less. Maybe we don't need all the housing that needs to be built, and maybe we can make a hyper-efficient building that doesn't need to, that's actually quite cheap to build and easy to build, and that doesn't need to be financed by something that has to be built first to then kind of bring money to build this project. So maybe we can kind of make it all much easier in itself and give it at the same time a facade and leave the old building in its glory as it is. So it's almost like a backpack we built to the old building, to the schoolhouse. We can put old techniques, everything we need in the new one, and just plug it straight into the old one. which would give this as a plan, which suddenly you start to feel again the older rhythm also of houses with a very similar size next to the old schoolhouse, which was an exceptional building, which has a bigger scale. And we would somehow flip the building, turn it, the museum. Today the museum is here, and then it would be in that direction, forming a corner towards the little square in the back. Creating here the little square, keeping the trees, and having this visibility on two sides for the ground floor of the museum. On top of that, yeah, this is kind of the new core for the old building, and at the same time we can organize also techniques there. Creating also much more presence towards this backside with the corner. This is then the front side, and where you start to see actually that what we did with the facades on top. If you see here, this is the old museum, the old schoolhouse, which becomes the smaller rooms of the museum. And in the new space, we add a really big space that's much higher and has a whole other dimension than the other spaces, and actually can do something that the other spaces cannot, kind of a hyper flexible space, which is suddenly this one much higher than they actually had initially in mind. What is important is here the facades. So actually thinking about these smaller museums and how can they not have to build every time a lot of walls, a lot of infrastructure every time they do a new exhibition. It's just controlling of daylight, of light conditions within the space. It's just structurally. So what you see here in front are our shutters for sunlight. So you can actually cut off sunlight to the inside, but still have like a kind of a more diffused light. And on the inside, we have another type of panels, which can basically close off the box completely, creating kind of a full flexible space on two sides that can be completely connected to the city or completely deconnected from the city and isolated in itself. To finish with a very short part on a project that we're doing now, but that maybe links back to the beginning. Which is an extension of an existing house built by Wolfgang Wetzel, not far from Basel. A very beautiful house with 3 meters on the ceilings, 2 floors that are inside the slope with a nice swimming pool. You see here, this is the living space, and then here's the kitchen, and then here in the back you have the bedrooms, and then there's like a little studio downstairs. You can see the situation. So it's almost like everything on one floor and then an extra studio downstairs. Turned a bit, very nice view. There's a swimming pool in front. We glued another one on top because it gave us an LA feeling there. And we just were wondering, like, okay, what can we still add to that house? They wanted to have an extra floor to it. Also with the idea of during Corona, suddenly there's like office space missing for them to work. And maybe in the future, maybe they want to move upstairs and maybe the parents move in or maybe not, or, you know, like how can we continue living in this house and how can this kind of keep on evolving the house in itself? And this became somehow the project. How can you build something where a lot is possible, but we don't have to decide today? So it became just a roof for against the sun, against the rain, that will also recuperate some energy, and the garden, which is almost on the same level in the back as the roof, will somehow continue over the roof plane, and you would just create something very simple there, just a roof. So now we are here with them. It's in full development. This is from last week. And it's almost the cheapest, simplest structure we can build. And maybe we don't have to plan anything else for the moment. Maybe that's enough. And maybe they can just move in and see what they need. And if they need it, we do it. So maybe we have to build a bathtub in the beginning. It's still a question. Maybe it has to be a toilet. Maybe you just have to prepare the pipes. We don't know yet. But maybe that's enough. And maybe we can just see if you live in there that it's really nice with not having walls. Maybe we need walls, and then we build walls in there, or maybe a cupboard can do. and we can just kind of keep on discovering this house, and this can develop with them together. And maybe over time we have to close off the staircase and it becomes an independent unit like the studio downstairs, and it becomes 3 houses that can be sold or rented out differently. Maybe it can be this, maybe it can even be more. Maybe it can become very dense. But this we will have to discover over time how far it will bring us. So thank you very much. There were a lot of questions.
I hope so. Which is what we are going to start with now. So thank you very much for the lecture. And I will hand the microphone over to my first year student. There.
Hi.
Hello.
I like your project. It's very nice. Nice to look at. Interesting. For me, my first question is that like the overall topic is uncertain conditions. And for me, that goes hand in hand with sustainable usage and sustainable like architecture in itself, which your projects like showed. It was very like nature, like all the park, all the flowers were protected, or also with the sailing boats, like it was all very close to nature and also very very sustainable. Like the rooms can be used in one way or also in another way. Like it's and they're already were there, nothing new were built, they were reused. And my question is that those uncertain conditions, when did you start building like that or seeing architecture like that? Was it because of Corona and climate crisis, like those modern times influenced that, or was it like a thing that was already there, or did it change over time, like the perception of architecture?
Thank you for the question.
Of course.
No, it's interesting to think about it for us also. It was there before because for instance, the fountain project, that's a project we won in 2018.
Yeah.
Which was focusing for us a lot on this. And I think it also maybe has a clue in it. Where does it come from? Charlotte, as well as me, we have both worked a lot in landscape. Our offices also, in one particular landscape office. And when you start thinking about landscape, you think in a very different way than architecture. You don't finish something. You don't say, okay, now it's finished. No, you just put things there, and then you come back a year later, it grows, and maybe this didn't work, and maybe you have to change it.
Yeah.
So then we changed it because it didn't grow, and yeah, that one, worked much better than we anticipated. So maybe we need more of that. And
yeah.
It's this idea of the unfinished, of the kind of the possibility of leaving things open for life to happen in it or to change over time, which of course cannot always be. Like a lighthouse, it's much more difficult to kind of leave that as an open system. But with the house now, you're talking with the clients like that. Like, look at it as a garden rather than as a house in which we can see, kind of how we like the garden or not. And I think it has a lot to do with where we come from a bit and what we've been talking about in other situations.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have also a question because in the beginning you talked about controlling and the wish of controlling everything, and even now you notice it again and losing control. And you presented your presentation and your projects with always one strong idea. I think in every project you said there's one strong idea, and this is really, I think, I don't know, designed to the limit. Or in every project there's one big idea, and leaving the rest maybe, or all the rest is sorted around this one idea. And I think my question is about getting this idea. Is it in the beginning of a project and then everything else solves, or when comes this one idea, like in looking at the project, analyzing a place, and then getting this one, what is it about?
Yeah, I think Yeah, how do we work? Yeah. Good question. Yeah, we are not, Charlotte and me, we're not architects who develop 20 options and then pick one. There's a lot of, maybe it's also because we have a small structure. We're not 300 people where you can just, okay, let's now for 1 week just all brainstorm. There's not the time or energy or like kind of conditions for that. But yeah, it's just, I think in our work in general, we have, for example, these uncertain conditions. This is something that keeps on going around. And it's not that for every project we start from zero. It's not that you say now, okay, now we're doing a house, let's, think about what's a house. But it's always in context with everything that's been happening before. So it's like an ongoing research, let's call it. And it's not only this topic, so there's this kind of a few that are floating around. So yeah, as soon as it falls in that, I think you can also link a lot back to those projects and kind of keep on developing on it. Like if now putting the lecture together for me was also quite interesting. The Basel Pavilion is from a year ago, where then the fountain is 2018. And putting them back to back, for me, suddenly a lot of things made sense. And maybe they are very similar in idea. There's just an evolution in it. So it's definitely, we definitely don't have aha moments. It's not like now we found the gold. It's more, yeah, what do we believe in? What do we think? And how does it link to the rest of it, the rest of the work? I don't know if it answered your question. It's quite cryptic.
The train. Oh, it was like the project with the train. It was about this big beam, and then there's a big beam. Or the project with the museum is like the plug-in. It's like one, and all these. There's always one idea, and that solves the problem you presented at the beginning.
It's also when you work with a group, it's also easier to talk around one clear idea.
Yeah, okay.
Because otherwise, if you have like 20 different ideas around, it's not always clear what you're doing. So I think it's automatically when you work with more people that it's you have to be more clear about what you want to do.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I think it answers it. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks. Other questions?
I was wondering, how do the uncertain conditions that you mentioned match with renderings like the one you showed from Artifactory Lab? Because they're super realistic, and if you don't know that this is a rendering and that's not built yet, you can't distinguish between the reality and the rendering. And I think you didn't show much renderings, but yeah, anyway.
Yeah, that's I think from all the renderings I showed, that's the only one that's made outside of the office. So everything else is made inside the office, which makes it much easier. I know also the one of Centre Culturel Suisse, that's ASBR who made them, but kind of in discussion. Yeah, sometimes a collage leaves, of course, more open. Like the collages we made for the Basel Pavilion, yeah, they're much more open because it's only a suggestion in a way. Everybody sees that it's not reality. And it's definitely a question that is actively being raised in the office about this certain condition. How do you draw time? How do you draw evolution? How do you draw something that we don't know how it's going to be? For example, with the whole drawing of the Basel Pavilion of the park, that's been kind of quite a long discussion in the office of like, yeah, what do we draw? How do you draw this? And that's why it's more symbols now than it's actually plans, because it's more a symbolic representation of what it could be. But it's definitely a question that we're raising constantly in the office, and it's something that is an almost like a graphical part of that research that's going on at the same time. but it's definitely we didn't find the finished solution for it. It's also an ongoing research, but I think it's definitely it's a very good question, because of course if you talk about uncertainty, if you talk about evolution, time as a factor, we call it time as material. Yeah, you have to start representing in other ways, but this is in general. We kind of, for the moment, and we're a lot into maps also, and mapping. Every map is a representation of a certain condition at a certain time, but it's schematic representation. It is not like that. Already the moment that the map is drawn, there's so much things that are left out or that are not shown. There's nothing shown of things that move, that change. So automatically, this is already a very curated thing. And how can you kind of free yourself of that? That's it's a studio. It would be an interesting studio to teach. Thinking about how to draw.
I have a question about your collaboration partners, because I was wondering how you find them, or do they find you? Is it just that you have a lot of friends, or do you go to a lot of gallery openings? Does it help to work in academia? Like, how do you stumble across them, or how do they stumble across you? Do you know them well if you start working with them, or?
It's a big mix. It's not like there's everybody we work with. It goes in all directions. Like the tables we make together with Metallbau. It's somebody we knew from a project before that they made for us a little fence, and we noticed it was very nice working with them. And then suddenly you realize it's actually a really good collaboration. So it becomes an active collaboration. Other people are friends of friends of friends. Other people, we just write them. That also works, just writing people. Sometimes they respond, sometimes not. And then you get to know them, you see if it works or not. Not every collaboration is successful. Every project that comes out of a collaboration can be successful, but it doesn't mean that you then work for life together. It's also kind of the freedom of growing and shrinking of the office, and together with the partners. But it's academia works very well also in that, because you meet a lot of people that are from structural engineers to within the school here also there's from art teachers to music teachers. So if you need somebody for that, you know where to go and look, and asking around and writing people and that you think are interesting. You see somebody you think is interesting, you write them and you ask, do you want to do something together?
If it's okay for everyone, I would have a second question also. My second question concerns all these like technical questions that you always kind of put forward concerning, for example, the office space. And I was wondering what programs you use for that.
We're still very old school. We're not in BIM yet. We should be, but we're not yet. No, we are in Rhino.
And like the calculations, or?
I know we work together with engineers, with
okay.
For this. No, I don't calculate myself the ventilation. This is something we do together with specialists for that. It just kind of it's also a bit what we start to realize is as an architect you never stand alone. You don't do that much, there's a lot of people who do a lot of things also for you, and kind of it's not that you kind of are in charge of as well ventilation as structure as social planning. There's the team can be quite big, so also it becomes a pleasure of working together because you need them, so let's not act like they're not there.
I'm actually very impressed with your general attitude towards your project and architecture. I think you've said several times that knowing when it's enough, that should be enough. Let's not do more than that. you work a lot with infrastructure, with like just the ceiling, with frameworks and structure. And I think you mentioned many times that you want to leave an open system for things to develop. You already mentioned that you're more like a gardener in a way, to see how things evolve rather than somebody who controls everything. And there was one project where you said, you know, this project is just too big. We're not going to try to change everything. We're just changing the in-between spaces. It's almost like a little bit like acupuncture. You do a little bit here and then it might have a bigger effect. But I'm very impressed with this general attitude. And I was wondering where this comes from, because I think in architecture, a lot of people want to control everything. They want to leave their mark on everything, but you act very lightly. And where does that come from? Or do you have any precedents?
It's a learning process. Because I can of course say here out loud easily, like let go of control, but of course, I think there's a drastic generation shift now in architecture, and I think I still got educated in one before, where control was part of the whole game. The more control, the better. You know, everything is drawn, everything is done. But again, there I think landscape is again an important factor, because it's a whole other scale with which you work, a lot less control you have. I think in the beginning, I didn't show much of build work that we did and stuff. It's much more kind of ideas and projects that are around now. But in the beginning, we did a lot of projects that there was no money, there was no, you know, you do things yourself. So the conditions themselves didn't allow us to, you know, to do the fancy marble and so you start thinking in other ways of how can we also solve it. We cannot do it like that. Yeah, and I think people on our paths also that cross. I think it's a lot of people that you start to see that do it differently, maybe in other fields, not maybe always architecture, but also other fields. And that everyone asks you the question. We did a scenography in Bangladesh with an enormous group of people from Bangladesh as well as from Switzerland. It was a lot of people. We were an enormous group. We were just a small part of it. And there the whole question was, how can we do, it's for a really big biennale. It's 500,000 people in 10 days. And every year they build walls, they throw it all away, and they came to us. And they formed that group, let's say, and we were part of it. And they asked the question, how can we do it differently? And then you start thinking yourself. It's almost like the client starts to kind of push you in certain direction and start to realize like, hey, we don't actually need scenography. And at the end, there was no more scenography. It's just about like looking at spaces and see what's the best space for which piece. Can a piece adapt to a space? Can, you know, how much can we do? And again, there it's. I definitely don't want to claim that it's us sitting at home saying, "Hey, let's do things differently." It's somehow this kind of whole environment, and we feel it also around us. I think a lot of students nowadays also raise those questions of like, can we do it differently? So. Yeah, I think it's a mix of all of this. I never really kind of, sorry, I'm really giving unclear answers here. Yeah, it's, I find it hard to give a clear answer to that, because I don't know myself a bit where it comes. I can just point out different people, different situations that all together kind of push this in a certain direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, my question is, for the reasons of collaboration and network, do you prefer you personally to work locally, or for example, for a young starting architect, would you recommend to already choose a city, for example, or would you recommend to gain experience that is completely a different scenario, for example, in Bangladesh?
I think it's very depending on the person. Again, an unclear answer. Because I noticed ourselves, Charlotte and me, we worked a long time. We traveled a lot. We met in other countries than where we lived and then where we live now. We have quite a long parcours of going around, of finding out things, of discovering places and cities, and ended up living in Basel. Super happy we live there, but we're both not from there. Cannot imagine our practice anywhere else for the moment, but never chose the city. It was never. I didn't know the city until I moved there. It just felt really well, and it's the city where we decided to stay. At the same time, I have friends that graduated, picked their city where they lived, and started their practice, and are super successful. So there is no magic recipe. There is just, if you think you are ready for it and you really want to try it, you can also just after a year decide, no, I wanted the other one, and you can still change. It's all okay. It's like it's not a one-way street somehow. I think as long as you go to places that interest you and that you're interested in. And
okay, thank you.
Thank you. I have one question about the lighthouse competition, and it's about performance. So you made this comparison to the sailing yachts, to the racing boats, and you explained how they are like built in very precise ways and like quite skillfully engineered, let's say, and using high-tech materials. And of course, this has like there's a goal towards increasing performance in these boats. And so I was wondering if there's a kind of if there was this kind of underlying ambition also in your project, or open ambition in your project, to have this kind of performative aspect, or let's say, did this like play a part in your thinking process or in the process? You know, to make, because I think it's in general an interesting question to think about architecture in terms of performance. And yeah, so that's why I was wondering.
No, just the boats are even engineered like that if they break, even they know there's so much on the limit that with too much storm they break.
Yeah.
Just for the sake of performance, that they can go so fast that there's a breaking point. Of course, we cannot do that. And there's also no interest in doing that. But it just got us really fascinated. I'm always already fascinated also by this kind of, I find it almost like a fiction for me, although it's a fact, this kind of Alinghi boat flying on a helicopter over the Alps to race on a lake on the other side. This image was quite important for us in the whole project. And yeah, it became about, the initial idea was, can we keep that spot empty? Because the Lake of Geneva is very built. There's a lot built and it's not much accessible. So we had this kind of dream of, it's a spot as far as you can go onto the lake. Why would we occupy it with a big chunk of something? So there was very fast this idea of something should float above. And then just the fact of, something floating, and just, we don't need much space. There's no reason to build a lot, just this disc. So very fast we were into kind of tensile structures and how this thing can hang. And of course there, our engineer, Sneža Puskas, was very important in making that all work. And of course, then there's it's fun to think about this performance thing also, like how can you also like use just what you need. You know, how can you reduce even on material? You know, we don't need to build a big stone tower. We can just have also kind of a very elegant, very thin metal box that can also do the job. So there's definitely the idea of performance, but that comes a lot with the idea of conditions also, I think, because it becomes, these buildings become adaptable in a way. For example, the Kunst Museum in Alton, where it starts sliding, it starts opening up, so very fast performance becomes a question in these topics in an indirect way. But it's definitely fascinating. The whole boat world is very fascinating. We made tables, but I didn't show them. We made for another Kunstbau, we made together with Fabian Marti 11 really big tables, and they had to be super light because we had to be able to hang them on the wall. So we used also composite material. The same. It was a boat company who built them, the tables, the plates, because it's the most lightweight materials you can have. So also again, they could be moved easily. It's fascinating to dive in those worlds and to discover a bit what they can do, what we're not looking at, maybe.
I'm afraid another arm went up. I was just gonna, that's fine.
I have one more question, because I think at the project with the ceiling, where you designed the ceiling, you also work with the workers. And my question is about if you work from planning to building all these, I think in Germany it's called Leistungsphasen. I don't know. It's like, but is it important for you just not only planning, that you also plan until it's built, and to plan with the workers and to plan the details? And yeah.
This one was especially intense one. It was really a tricky one. And there we worked together with Hilbert Architecture, an office, like friends of us with who we also share the space. And he had been working on the renovation of the building before. But there we did, as the office, the main, from Bauleitung to from design, Bauleitung, the whole shebang. And it was necessary in that one because it was really, I think Bauleitung, we had a lot of help of Tobias, of Hilbert Architecture, but it was important to be involved because it was a lot of decision-making on site, because you work with existing conditions. When you work with an existing situation, you don't have perfect plans. You don't have plans where nobody ever drew how that ceiling was. We took it down, everything fell down, and it was a mess. And you have to start figuring out, okay, and then on site, you start to say, like, we keep that, and then the lights have to come in between, so you have to go and tape on the ceiling where the hooks will come to know exactly that they will fit or not. So it's very much, that one was extremely intense for a very small project, because you get this very technical side to it, and because if somebody else would do it, it would become, or if somebody else would do it separate from you, because I think Tobias was still very involved, it would have been difficult. No, the Parisian project, the French office will be much more involved in the building than we are. We work very closely together, kind of Zoom constantly. But they will be, of course, they're there, so they're on building site. So as soon as an office, as a project is far away, you have another relationship with it. But normally, yeah, the tables we make together, the projects, other projects we built in Basel, yeah, then we do the whole thing. It's about, because then you can develop things. We did a housing where we developed together with the heating company, kind of a really big heating, like the main part of the house is a heater. Yeah, then you have to sit together with that guy that's gonna do that, to see what he can do, and then you can draw what he can do. Because if you draw something that he cannot do, he will not do it. It's So it's for the moment there's already like flooding on site, like because it's very sloping already. It's a very there's a big height difference, and so the water infiltration is not fully happening yet today, or too slow. And then on top of that, if that will be built, there will actually it has underground parking garages, for example, and all of that. So this is something for everybody to realize. If you build something underground, it's like building a wall up above ground. There's life underground and there's water underground, and you stop everything. So water cannot go through anymore. So our fountain will, within that, help with the infiltration of the water, that it doesn't just get evacuated against the building and moved away. But it will help in the part before to infiltrate. But it's, of course, it's only on the site itself. It's not in a bigger scheme of Lausanne. And it's also still in full development, that project. This is quite a technical one, and there we're very happy to have ICO, the water engineers, with us to actually make it function this as a machine.
So thank you so much for the very interesting lecture.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.